Hello, and welcome to Spokane County Spotlight. I'm your County Commissioner Josh Kerns, and on today's County Spotlight, we are joined by a very special guest from the 4th Legislative District, State Senator Mike Padden. Thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here with you.
Yes. For those of our folks that may be new to the area or maybe aren't as familiar with us, you have a public service record that is just incredible, but it actually started prior to you ever running for office when you went to Gonzaga Law School and earned your law degree. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and what prompted you to go into the legal field?
Well, I had been involved in politics. I had a full-time job for the King County Republican Party and then for the Republican Party in Louisiana, and it dawned on me that I could continue doing these political things, but I'd have to move around to different parts of the country and everything, and I thought, well, if I'm an attorney, I'd be my own boss and could stay in one place, and my father had worked for U.S. Steel and was transferred to different cities, so the idea of that stability was a main reason. Plus, I like the whole area of the law. I like public affairs, and so that was the rationale.
Okay. How long did you practice law? In any memorable cases, and kind of what area of law did you?
Well, it was somewhat of a general practice, but I did have a number of cases. I had one case. Well, I was a city attorney up in Deer Park for 3 years, from 1977 to 1980, right before I ran for the legislature. But so that was part-time. But I was referred a criminal defense case, a drug case, and the guy was certainly guilty of using, but the sheriff's department was trying to go for bigger fish, and they tried to move him up. Well, they never got the bigger fish, so they overcharged him. And Judge Richard Guy, who later ended up on the state Supreme Court, was the Superior Court judge, and he ruled as a matter of law that there'd been entrapment, that my client would have not committed the crime but for the pressure of these sheriff guys trying to get the bigger fish. So, I mean, that was one case. I had a personal injury case of a fellow working on the Lower Monumental Dam who fell and was greatly injured, and we ended up suing with my partner, Ray Tanksley Jr., who later became a district court judge also, suing the federal government in Atkinson, Wismar, and Becker in federal court. So that was very interesting, and had to take a number of depositions in different parts of the state.
All right. Did your experience as an attorney and working as a lawyer, did that help prompt you to run for elected office? Did that have an impact?
Well, I thought I could make more of a difference with that background if I were to be elected. But no, I was motivated to run because I came out of the pro-life movement. I was on the Human Life Board back in '78. And I was looking at the voting records, and the fellow I was going to run against, Walt Knowles, was the only legislator in Spokane County, Republican or Democrat, and we had a number of Democrats back then, that voted for state funding of abortion. So I thought, well, I'd offer a contrast on that issue. I announced against him, and then 2 months later, he announced he wasn't running and had next to him his choice, which was Denny Delwell. So that was my first race, was against Denny in the Valley. He had to move to Millwood to live in the district, but that turned out well. 1980 was a very good year for Republicans with Ronald Reagan at the head of the ticket.
Tell us more about that first race. Tell us what that was like in 1980, because that was, I mean, that for Republicans, like you said, that was a very, very good year. Certainly a wave year. What was that first run for office like for you?
Well, it's the great unknown, and I had a primary opponent. This is rather odd, who worked for my father-in-law. But Mike Williams and then Delwell. So there were the three of us, and I worked hard, and I knew a little about politics from all my time working with the King County Party, and we doorbelled hard, and I actually left the law practice in June to devote full time to the campaign, which was maybe a good decision politically, maybe not the best decision for the finances of the family, but anyway, and it turned out well, and we ended up with about 55% of the vote. And the Valley, not that long before, had been 3 Democrats with Big Daddy Day and Mrs. Upton and Walt Knowles. So gradually in 78, Ren Taylor got elected, and then in 80, both Bob McCaslin Sr., we'll call him now, and myself were elected. And they had tried to recruit me and Bob's wife to run against Big Daddy Day, who had quite a history. He was Speaker during the coalition way back in 1963. But he had voted pro-life, so I didn't really want to run against him. And anyway, it was a great year, and the district became all Republican, which it stayed for quite a while until George Orr won in 1990, and he was in 4 years. And Larry Krause beat him, and it's been a solid Republican district ever since.
Yeah. Could you, so, I mean, taking it to kind of that district level, the 4th legislative district, I believe has always kind of been centered around what is now the Spokane Valley, and kind of as redistricting has happened every 10 years, you've been a part of that district, starting in 1980, running there, and your time in the House and your time in the Senate. But how do you describe the 4th? Like, if somebody asks you, what's the 4th legislative district like? How do you describe the district you represent?
Well, you're right. Geographically, the center has been the city of the Spokane Valley, who are people very independent. They do not want to live in the city of Spokane. That's why they moved to the valley. And by and large, they like to have a little more elbow room and not be quite as congested. Now, a lot of that has changed with the dictates of the Growth Management Act. But the other thing is that people move in and out quite a bit. So I always felt running for the House every 2 years, you kind of had to reintroduce yourself to a lot of the people because they were new. But they are independent. They're more conservative than they are Republican. And they look at things quite a bit different than the city of Spokane. And I remember some issues where the vote would be just so different. They wanted to sewer the whole area once, and the newspaper was for it. The South Hill voted for it about 60%. The North Side voted against it barely, and the Valley voted against it about 80%. So, no, I've enjoyed, I think I've been very blessed because the people there generally have agreed with my conservative center-right position on issues.
Yeah, in 1995, you were the majority floor leader in the House. So when you got up into that leadership position in the caucus, can you explain to us kind of what that position does, but then what that's like when you get into leadership in the caucus? Because from what I understand, there's kind of 2 tracks you can take. There's the caucus leadership, or there's a chairmanship.
Well, that's right. And actually, the caucus made a special provision for me that year. We had so many conservatives, they agreed that I could be chair and be in leadership. So I was chair of the Ethics, Law, and Justice Committee, we called it then, and in leadership. So I was under the majority leader, which was Dale Foreman, a very accomplished attorney from Wenatchee, and the speaker also was from the Wenatchee area, Clyde Ballard. So I worked with them and on the floor, helping move the legislation along that was our priorities and everything. And that worked out pretty well. And we had hearings on some interesting things and got some bills through the House. But getting them all the way through and with a Democrat governor, but we were able to stop a lot of bad bills also and have some influence on the budget.
Yeah. So how many of those years in the House then were you in the majority as opposed to the minority?
Not very long. I mean, I was in 14 2/3 years. I was in the majority the first 2 years, and then in '94, which really was about 3 months, because I got appointed a judge in March of '95, and that was kind of the height of everything, being both chairman of a committee and in leadership. But yeah, most of the time we're in the minority, and the reason was way back in '81, the Republicans made a horrible mistake. The budget revenues were down, and they wanted more revenues rather than cutting spending, so they enacted the sales tax on food. So I was one of 5 Republicans that would not vote for that, but it passed, and the people immediately went to an initiative, overturned it, and the Republicans were in the desert until '94.
Oh, wow. Wow, okay. So with that your initial stint in the House, and then you know, and then your time now in the Senate, which we'll get more to. What's the biggest change that you've seen in the legislature? You know, it's, you know, on its basis, you know, you're passing laws, you have committees, but what are what's the biggest thing that's changed that you've seen in Olympia?
The change to me was the difference between the House and the Senate, and the House is, of course, 98 members, the Senate is 49, so relationships are more important in the Senate because there's fewer senators. Also, the discipline, the control that leadership exerts is much stronger in the House than the Senate. The Senate, you're more independent and can do things. Obviously, you've got to have good relations with people in both chambers if you're going to get legislation all the way through. But I've been very fortunate that way, even in the minority, been able to sponsor legislation and get it through. So I think those were some of the big differences. I mean, the other big difference was when TVW started filming everything, the committee hearings and the floor action. I remember in the House, in the committee, Democrat Seth Armstrong was chair, and we felt he was making some very autocratic rulings and everything, and it culminated in the Republicans walking out of the meeting. Well, the TV wasn't there then. I think if the TV had been there, it maybe would not have been the wisest thing to do. But, you know, and then some people would, their speeches would be more for the TV audience than what the debate was all about.
Well, we see that today, certainly. So in those, you know, one also different that you had talked about the folks that you served with, and I know when you're in the House, you have a seatmate. Did you have the same seatmate the 14 years you were in the House?
No, different folks. I started with Ren Taylor, who actually got elected in '78, so he was there when I got there. He had been the superintendent of the West Valley School District. He was a good guy, and we worked together on a number of things for the district, but definitely more of the moderate type Republican. So there was a little difference in philosophy, but we worked together. And then I had a number of other folks later. Dr. Charlie Wolf is one I remember the most, who was an excellent legislator. He was an occupational physician, and so he could speak the language of labor on disability issues and be very accurate. But we had a number of good folks, and you know, Larry Krause is another person that I worked with and was good. And then after I got appointed, Mark Sturck was who replaced me, and Mark later became sheriff of Spokane, and then went into the ministry. So we've had some very good legislators. One other one that I should mention, who was just outstanding, was Lynn Schindler, and she specialized in educational issues. But just one of those people that everybody liked, and whose word was good and was very competent and very sharp.
All right. So you've touched on it a few times about when you were appointed as a district court judge. Can you tell us about that appointment? And was that something you'd been eyeing for a while? And what was it like making that transition?
I was encouraged a lot by Bob McCaslin Sr.
Okay.
And it was a really good thing for my family, and I'd been interested. But yeah, the county commissioners made the appointment, and so we had Phil Harris was on the board of county commissioners and was a supporter of mine. But anyway, they appointed me, and they initially gave me the civil docket because I had a little more experience in civil, even though I had some criminal cases that I mentioned to you, but I had more experience in civil, so I did that, and then later got on the criminal docket. But they also, twice during the time I was there, I was elected the presiding judge.
Oh, okay.
And was able to get involved in hiring a new court administrator. Ron Miles was an outstanding from Kansas, and then later he became the Superior Court administrator. And we also started the DUI court. I was able to help get a grant from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And it was a therapeutic court, and it's been very successful in actually turning lives around. And if you believe in redemption, you can see evidence of that sometimes. And so that was very rewarding to do that, and work closely with Judge Patty Walker Conley, who's still on the bench, and we handled the DUI court together.
Okay. Well, so you served on the district court 2007, and then I guess we'll say you retired, but I don't think you've ever really retired. So, because in 2008 you were on the board of the National Traffic Safety Administration.
Well, I actually was hired by them.
Okay.
As a judicial liaison. So I had 5 states, Region 10, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, and I would talk to judges about traffic safety issues, but especially talk to them about the DUI court, which NHTSA strongly supported, and based on the record we had in Spokane County with a successful court, I think is why they hired me. So I did some traveling to the different states, got to go up to Alaska twice, and you know, made all the states, and stayed busy. I worked in cooperation with the legal liaison, who still no longer has a position, but a fellow that I've been friends with a long time because of that association.
Okay, so so you helped those states and those areas kind of implement their own DUI type regulations and courts,
and other issues that came up, the traffic safety issues and things, that best practices, and we had traffic safety resource prosecutors, would work with them, and work a lot with the judges, and set up conferences and that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah, and we all know, you know, another big way to improve traffic safety is the infrastructure itself. You've led on a lot of big transportation and infrastructure projects. You know, one we actually just cut the ribbon on not that long ago was Bigelow Gulch. Yeah, so and we know we certainly appreciate your support on that project.
Well, that's
over
great.
the years.
Both Bigelow Gulch and the North-South Corridor have something in common that I feel is very beneficial to the valley, to the 4th Legislative District, and that is they go from the north and they get away to the valley, but you can come in and you can make a decision.
Yeah.
Do I take a right and go into the city of Spokane for a sporting event or whatever, or do I go to the valley where there's free parking and all sorts of opportunities for shopping and other things? So I think it's a benefit to the whole area, but I thought especially to the valley.
Yeah. So now, public safety, criminal justice has always been an issue you've been a leader on. Is that what led you, to return to the legislature when you rejoined the legislature and went back as a senator?
Well, I was very close with Bob McCaslin during the time that I was in the House. He was in the Senate all that time and stayed in. And then Bob became quite ill and had to resign his position. So there was an appointment. I went through the appointment process, and I didn't get the appointment, but I felt, well, what the heck? You know, it's a free country. Why don't I run for the position? So I ran. I think the appointment was in April. I ran that November, and it was an all-Republican race. There was no Democrat that filed. So I ran against the fellow who had been appointed, Jeff Baxter, and we had a spirited contest, and both sides worked really hard, and a lot of doorbelling, a lot of efforts, mailings, everything. But I was fortunate enough to win that, and then head in, and I felt I had a great advantage over a lot of people because of all my time in the House, and at least knew the process. I mean, the Senate is different, some different rules, but it was a huge advantage having been in the House all those years.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate about seeking an appointment and not getting it, and having to go about it the old-fashioned way.
Right, right.
So when you came back into the legislature in 2011, I mean, looking back, so much has happened from 2011 to now, you know, almost 2025. You know, what is the most memorable, your most memorable moment, or the thing that you remember most fondly? Because I mean, we all know that there's been good and bad
well, there's been
during
good
that
and bad.
time.
There's a lot of issues. I guess the most dramatic thing was when the Republicans went to the Ninth Order and took over control of the budget with three conservative Democrats. It was Tim Sheldon, Rodney Tom, and Castema. And everybody knew we had the votes. So often they go to the Ninth Order to prove a point or whatever, the minority party. But this time we actually had the votes, and they kept it. And then later, we got control of the Senate. So for 5 years, and I got to chair a committee, which was probably the highlight of my time in the legislature as a whole. You know, we got to get a lot of things done. So that was very exciting. But the other thing is, I just want to, how unlike what people hear about Washington, D.C. and the bitterness and all the infighting, and although there are great differences philosophically with folks in the Senate, there's a number of folks, a number of Democrats that I consider good friends and have worked with on certain issues. One of the most liberal, you almost call him a socialist, Bob Hasagawa, and I worked together on civil forfeitures that we thought, you know, you should not be taking somebody's property if they haven't been convicted of a crime. And we worked together recently on a bill I got through that I have high hopes for employee ownership, to encourage employee ownership businesses as a model. They're called ESOPs. And that bill passed unanimously. I'm on the commission. We just awarded the first grant for a business that's going to convert to employee-owned, and so many benefits of that for the workers and for the area, you know. And we have a number. Schweitzer Engineering is probably the largest in our area, but a number of grocery stores like Yolks and Winco are employee-owned, and people retire in a better situation. They have savings, and it's just a positive thing all the way around. You touched on kind of relationships with folks in Olympia, and you've always been known as someone who's got great relationships with your constituents and local elected officials. You know, how are those relationships and those communications that you have with folks? How do those help sort of point you in a certain direction when you're over in Olympia representing the folks back home? Well, certainly if you have a bill, it's always smart politically, especially when the Democrats are controlling things, to have a Democrat as a co-sponsor, maybe the number two or on that. So I did that, and you know, you would go them with an idea and sell it to them. But if they had trust in you, they're more likely to sign on. So that helped, and I worked very closely with Senator Peterson, who's now going to be the leader of the Democrats in the Senate. And he had a long record in the House. So if Democrats in the House saw his name on a bill, they're less likely to say, "Oh no, it's crazy right-wing Padden with his bill," you know. So it was very helpful that way.
Okay. You know, so earlier this year, you announced that you would not be seeking re-election. I'm not going to use the word retire because we've seen what that means. I don't know if you'll ever retire, but can I ask what's next? What's next for Mike Padden?
Yeah, well, as you may know, I was one of the 3 co-chairs of Michael Bumgarner's campaign for Congress. I worked hard on that. And I anticipate that I'll still be doing some work now that he's been elected in the district. I don't want to go back to D.C., but maybe do some senior policy advising and help with the scheduling and work with the local staff that he'll have in the district.
Okay. All right. So we are definitely gonna continue to see you a part of this community and making a difference. So I think we're certainly grateful for that. We are running low on time, so I will ask: is there anything else you'd like to share with our guests today? Any parting words of wisdom or anything that we weren't able to touch on?
No, just that I feel very blessed that God has allowed me to have this position for all these years, and to work with people to try and help them out, be it constituent problems or on a bill. A lot of these bills that passed, it was an idea from a constituent. So I've enjoyed that, enjoyed working with all the other folks that you come in contact with.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your service to our community. This has been an incredible episode of County Spotlight. I think I learned a ton of stuff about you, and I think our viewers did as well. So thank you all for joining us today. As always, a copy of today's Spokane County Spotlight can be found on our Spokane County YouTube channel. And once again, thank you for joining us on Spokane County Spotlight on KSPS World.